In this lesson, you will build your first pipeline, a simple Airflow DAG using just 3 Airflow-specific modules. Once you've built it, you will explore and run your DAG manually in the Airflow user interface. Let's get to it. For this and the following lessons, you have a fully functional Airflow environment available to you. Run this first cell to get the link to your Airflow environment's UI. When you click the link, it will open the Airflow UI in a new tab where you can log in with Airflow as the username and password. Once you've logged in, you'll land on the home page of your Airflow environment. This page contains a couple of quick links, as well as the current health status of the different components of the Airflow environment. Note that the triggerer component is not running in the sandbox, since we do not need it for this course. Lastly, the homepage shows recent history of runs of DAGs and tasks in your Airflow environment. For now, these stats are still empty. A little bonus tip: when you click on the user button in the bottom left corner, you can switch the UI to dark mode if you prefer to do so. Because it is easier to follow in a video, we'll stick to light mode for the course. Great, you have a running Airflow environment. Let's briefly go over the Airflow components that make it possible for you to run pipelines. The components running in this environment are the Airflow metadata database, which is where all information important for Airflow's functioning, such as the status of tasks, are stored. The scheduler, which is the heart of Airflow, which makes sure all DAGs and tasks run in the correct order. The API server, which accomplishes several tasks, the two most important for you right now being that it serves the Airflow UI for you to interact with and acts as the interface between workers and the Airflow metadata database. Workers are the Airflow components that actually run your task code. In Airflow 3, they can't directly interact with the metadata database anymore, like in Airflow 2, and use the task execution interface of the API server instead. And lastly, one component that is running in this environment is the DAG processor. It parses your DAG files and writes a serialized version to the Airflow metadata database. Let's add a first Airflow DAG for the DAG processor to parse and then add to your environment. The simplest way to add DAGs to Airflow is by defining them in individual Python files in a specified location among your Airflow project files, usually in a top-level folder called DAGs. In this notebook environment, you can use CellMagic to write the contents of one notebook cell to a Python file in the DAGs folder of your Airflow project. The magic command used is called writefile. This command is specific to the learning environment here. In a regular Airflow project, you would create a new Python file in the DAGs folder and then add your code to it directly. In Airflow, pipelines are represented by DAGs, and a DAG can be created by writing a regular Python function and decorating it with the @DAG decorator imported from airflow.sdk. Every task instantiated in the context of this function is automatically added to the DAG. Right now, the DAG is empty. Let's add a task. You could turn any Python function into an Airflow task by using the @task decorator. MyTask1 is a very simple function that just returns a small dictionary. You can use @task to turn this function into an Airflow task, and then assign the output of the called task function to an object to use it downstream. Next, you can define MyTask2 in the same way. This task accepts one argument called myDict and prints the value of one key in the dictionary. When calling this task function, you can pass in the output of the first task to myDict, so the second task will print Airflow to the logs. Feel free to change the value of my word in this dictionary to a word of your choice. Let's run this cell to save this DAG in the DAGs folder. Airflow's DAG processor component automatically checks the DAGs folder for new DAGs and adds them to the Airflow UI. In this environment, it does so every 30 seconds. So let's check back in the Airflow UI. Within the next 30 seconds, we should see our DAG show up. In the Airflow UI, you can see all your DAGs on the DAGs page, which you can access using the second button in the sidebar. And there it is, your first DAG. Click on the DAG name to get to the DAG overview page. From here, you can access all the information about your DAG, from its structure over run history to all logs of tasks that have run. It looks a little empty right now. Let's manually run this DAG. Click on the blue trigger button in the top right corner and then on Trigger to create a manual run of your DAG. Make sure the Unpause My First DAG on Trigger checkbox is selected, as pause DAGs cannot run. Pause the video now and run your first DAG. You can run it as many times as you want. Let's create at least 3 runs. Nice! You now have some DAG run history. Each of the bars represents one previous run of this DAG, and each square a task instance, one run of a task in those DAG runs. You can access the logs of your tasks by clicking on the squares. Here you can see that this run of mytask2 printed Airflow to the logs. Aside from this overview of previous DAG runs, called the Airflow grid, you can also see the graph of your Airflow DAG in the UI. Clicking on the graph icon below the DAG ID, you can see the 2 tasks in this DAG. By default, DAGs are read from left to right. In this case, mytask1 needs to complete successfully before mytask2 can run. But in the Options menu, you can change this behavior. For example, if you prefer to see the tasks from top to bottom. Let's add a third task to this DAG that runs as soon as mytask1 has completed successfully. Back in your notebook, you can add another task. I'll just call it mytask3 and add one simple print statement. Now, how can you make this task run after mytask1? In the case of mytask1 and mytask2, Airflow automatically inferred the dependency based on the result of mytask1 being used in mytask2. But mytask3 does not take any arguments. You'll have to define the dependency explicitly. To do so, import the chain function from the Airflow SDK. Chain defines explicit dependencies, here between mytask1 and mytask3. After running the cell, the DAG file is updated in the DAGs folder, and within the next 30 seconds, the DAG will be updated in the Airflow UI. You can call your task any name you'd like. The name of the function that you decorate with add task will be the name of the task inside of Airflow. Also, feel free to run more than a simple print statement in your function. Airflow can execute any Python code. Awesome! Let's explore the free task DAG in the Airflow UI together. You can now see that the third task was added. It depends on mytask1 and runs in parallel to mytask2. This is one of the great advantages of Airflow. You can run many tasks in parallel as soon as their requirements are met. You can also see that the latest DAG version got updated to v2. Airflow automatically keeps track of structural changes to your DAG. This feature, called DAG versioning, was added in Airflow 3. You can look at past versions of your DAG graph by selecting them in the Options menu. Additionally, the Code tab, where you can view but not edit the code of your DAG, also lets you look at the code of previous DAG versions. Alright, now you know everything you need to turn your Python code into tasks in an Airflow DAG. Let's practice by adding a second DAG to this environment. Here's the code of the second DAG, and here's the name of the addDAG decorated function, which represents the DAG ID. It is important that the DAG ID of all of your DAGs in an Airflow environment is unique. Beyond that, you are free to create your own DAG with as many tasks as you'd like. I chose to create a DAG with 4 tasks that does a little math. Note that the chain function in this DAG defines a slightly more complex dependency structure. The first element passed to the chain function is a list containing 2 objects that each reference a task. The second element is a single task. 2 dependencies are created, one between myTask2 and myTask4, and another one between myTask3 and myTask4. These 2 dependencies are added to the dependencies already inferred by Airflow based on data being passed between tasks. myTask1 and myTask2 are upstream of myTask3 due to inferred dependencies. Note that you can also define dependencies between 2 lists of tasks, as long as the lists are of the same length, and that you can add as many arguments to the chain function as you need. Once you are ready, run the cell to save the file to the DAGs folder, and after 30 seconds max, it will show up in the Airflow UI, where you can create as many DAG runs as you'd like and explore the DAG. If you make structural changes, such as adding or renaming a task in between runs, you will create several versions of your DAG. Alright, I'll leave you to experiment. Once you feel confident in creating these simple DAGs, you can go to the next lesson, where you will take the code from the GenAI workflow prototype in the previous lesson and turn it into 2 Airflow DAGs.